tissue injuries associated with open fractures of both bone legs. And myself, Dr. Anthony Jose Kannambally. I am from Yanapaya Medical College from the coastal town of Mangalore. As you all know, open fractures is a troublesome to any of the orthopedic surgeons. So any open fractures should be dealt with soft tissue coverage and a proper prevention of infection. So my study, I have in my study we have done a vacuum assisted closure study. In that, the objective is mainly to see for the rate of wound infection, see for the primary wound coverage, the duration of the hospital stay, as well as healing of a soft tissue injury. In generally, wound healing is influenced by 5 characters: the hemostasis, mesenchymal cell proliferation, inflammation, wound contraction, and remodeling of the soft tissue. So in my study, I used for a polyurethane open cell sponge, which you can easily available from a upholstery shop, which you autoclave and cut to match the shape of the wound, and the pore size average should be around 400 to 600 micrometer. In our hospital, we always keep the sponge ready autoclaved in case of emergency, and a suction tube with a standard negative suction drain of 16 mm. So whenever a open fracture comes, we give a thorough debridement and pose for the vacuum assisted closure. First you have to insert a suction tube. After the insertion of a suction tube to the most dependent area of the wound, you apply a sponge covered with adhesive plaster and the tube eventually connected to a drain. These are the pictures showing. After giving a thorough debridement, we have inserted a suction tube to the wound. The application of the sponge, which is already autoclaved and made in the size of the wound, covered with the adhesive plaster, so you can make a tight compartment in that, and the tube is connected to the drain. It's a final picture. So vacuum assisted closure, the mechanism of action, in short, this VAC converts a open wound of a fracture to a controlled closed wound. In short, it increases the local blood flow, decreases the local edema, and gives mechanical stretch on the cytoskeleton with release of cytokines. But the certain conditions which we do not use VAC, that are in case of exposed anastomotic sites, in exposed vasculature, exposed nerves, in case of malignancy, and untreated osteomyelitis. My materials and methods, we have mainly included type 3 and type 3B of open fractures. The number of patients was 70, age group between 20 to 60, and period of study is for 2 years. But 10 patients were not available for follow-up, so total of 60 patients divided into 2 groups, group A and group B, 30 patients in VAC and another is a sterile dressing group. Coming to the results, the main 3 variables for the coverage of wound, the hospital stay, and the variables were 3 weeks, 6 weeks and 1 month. Wound coverage were considered for less than 3 weeks and more than 3 weeks. As you all see, group A, that is a VAC, the coverage of wound was 26 patients attained within less than 3 weeks, and sterile dressing it took 20 patients took more than 3 weeks. And time taken for wound healing, the variables are 6 weeks. Again, VAC 26 patients with less than 6 weeks, and sterile dressing more than 6 weeks. The duration of hospital stay in 1 month, 26 patients less than 1 month stayed in our hospital. So infection is mainly assessed by the amount of drain, increased drainage, increased pain, increased erythema, and a purulent discharge. We used in our study the SPSS 16 software, and the level of significance was 5%. 2 tests, there is a Pearson's and chi-square test, and the p-value was less than 0.005. The advantages of VAC, it mainly protects the wound from external environment. So the main difference between a VAC and the sterile dressing is, in case of sterile dressing, daily you have to open the wound, you have to clean, and it may contaminate the wound because of the external environment conditions, and it absorbs exudate and decrease the local edema. It mainly prevents loss of fluid, increases local blood flow, maintains an acidic pH, decreases the bacterial load, granulation tissue formation, and release of cytokines. In VAC, in our study, every 10 days we have observed the wound for the amount of the soft tissue coverage and the amount of wound healing. So the 10 days we take the patient to the OT, under GA only we used to do. The results, the chi-square value was around 13.48 in case of VAC, and P value less than 0.001, which is significant. So my conclusion is vacuum assisted closed study provides a psychological, social and financial benefits to the patient by reducing the hospital stay and allowing early return to normal life. Thanks.
Okay, the paper is open for discussion. I invite 2 questions.
So what was your time interval between 2 VACs applications?
No, actually our patients only one VAC application.
Or just only one?
But depends. In our cases, around 10 patients, there was excessive soakage and excessive drainage. So we have removed the VAC under GA in the OT and applied one more sponge.
That's right. So how you can say what was the exact duration or how many days?
That was 10.
Because this study is going in our class.
Which one? Yeah.
So that's why I'm interested.
One case was around 1 month we have removed. Another case was around 2 weeks. Only 2 to 3 patients have developed that. If you give a tight compartment and a proper covering with a sponge, that can be avoided.
Okay, is there any other question? Okay, question from me. How long it took for wound healing, especially in your type 3A you mentioned, and the pictures you showed had a very small wound.
Yeah, mainly sir, it's for creating an environment for a proper soft tissue reconstruction procedure like flap or graft. So our procedure, when there is no infections, we proceed for a flap reconstruction.
Final cover.
Final
Okay.
cover.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I invite next speaker, Dr. Atul Agrawal.
Yes sir. मैं दे आपकी कौन सी आपके
Yeah, this one.
can I have mobile speaker?
Polio. This.
Excuse me sir. Is it on? Please switch on the lights. लाइट बंद करा सर लाइट बंद हो जाएगी तो वीडियो बिल्कुल क्लियर नहीं आ रही
Just
यहाँ पे कुछ नहीं उठ यहाँ पे कुछ लाइट बंद करा दो लाइट बंद हो जाएगी फिर अंधेरा नहीं आ रहा बाहर बिल्कुल क्लियर यहाँ पे आप शुरू करेंगे स्विच ऑफ द लाइट्स सर वीडियो क्लियर नहीं आएगी फिर जो ये रिकॉर्डिंग कर रहा हूँ बिल्कुल वो कुछ दिखाई नहीं दे दिस वन
Dr. Anuj can have Dr. A. Niguchi.
अतुल अग्रवाल को शुरू करना नहीं सबसे पहले शुरू से शुरू से स्टार्ट करके फिर सबसे पहले ये में सर
Shape of allogenic surface decalcified bone on its bone forming potential. Respected Chairman Sir and dear colleagues, this is the experimental study which I am going to present today, and these are the keywords: SDB, that is surface decalcified allogenic bone, osteoinduction, osteoconduction, surface decalcification and immune incompatibility. What has happened till today? The need for bone grafting is increasing day by day due to high incidence of road traffic accidents. It is surpassed only by blood transfusion as the most transplanted human tissue. Dutch surgeon Meekerien described the first canine bone repair in a cranial wound. The word graft was defined by Stedman as anything inserted into something else so as to become an integral part of the latter. Barth gave the idea of creeping substitution. Femister concluded that osteogenesis in bone repair occurred from endosteum. With the advent of bone bank in 1942 came the idea of decalcified bone. Urist gave the idea of bone morphogenetic protein. Tulien Chaudhary in 79 demonstrated the efficiency of SDB in bridging large gaps. Recently, nanocomposite scaffolds have come utilizing PLA and PGA. This is how allograft preparation was done, the diagrammatic representation. Preparing bone powder, bone chips and whole tubular graft. The surgical technique. A total of 25 rabbits were operated upon under open ether anesthesia. 1.5 to 2.5 centimeter long osteoperostal gaps were produced and were filled with bone chips, bone powder and whole tubular bone. Here we can see the bone chips uniting very well. The bone powder, here it is in a linear fashion, it's getting resorbed. The bone chips here, they are complete remodeling is seen here. The bone powder is getting resolved by the end of 12 weeks. Here the bone chips again, they are getting united and remodeled. However, there is no attempt at bridging of the gap in this control group. You can see one of the bone chip lying outside the gap and the rest are getting united. Here the bone powder is getting resorbed with new bone formation along the pedestal border. This is whole tubular graft getting incorporated. Here again the bone powder is getting resolved by the end of 12 weeks. This is the macroscopic appearance of unimplanted graft material. Here we can see macroscopic appearance at 4, 12 and 24 weeks of bone chips. We can see a thin fibrous layer uniting the graft. Here the gross appearance of bone chips and bone powder. We can see a slimy layer at the end of 12 weeks. Here histopathologically we can see thin chondrocytes. Here appositional woven bone formation. Here we can see marked vascularity in the grafted area. Here again photographs showing newly formed cartilage in the grafted area. Appositional woven bone formation. Here we can see increased vascularity in the grafted area. However, the bone powder is showing no vascular elements. After tetracycline fluorescence, we can see the general architecture of the bone showing circumferential and tubular lamellae. Here we can see intense golden yellow fluorescence at the site of woven bone formation and sharp ovals of yellow fluorescence in the areas of lamellar bone formation can be seen here. So the take home message is that surface decalcification of allogenic bone graft by 0.6 NaCl and its preservation in 70% ethanol results in substantial reduction in immune incompatibility with the provision of a permeable scaffolding which permits creeping substitution. However, bone powder failed to induce osteogenesis because of denaturing of bone morphogenetic protein. Thus, we can safely conclude that bone graft, when used as partially decalcified bone chips, showed early new bone formation at 4 weeks with better incorporation and remodeling by 16 weeks, and is just like Tendulkar, the pocket-sized Indian giant of cricket, whose 22 steps taken in a glittering 24 years career has become a living history today. Thank you, sir.
The paper is open for discussion. Only 2 questions are invited. If there are no questions, we move on to next paper. It's by Dr. Roop Singh.
Very good morning to the chairpersons and dear colleagues. So topic of my presentation is to evaluate the antimicrobial properties of the platelet-rich plasma and source of contamination in pressure ulcers. Such type of pressure ulcers may not be seen in the West, but these type of pressure ulcers we are seeing. And till today there is no definitive treatment for these. And few studies have done that new adjuvant therapies like PRP and all those things can help in healing of these pressure ulcers. So we took up this project. So it was way back in 1993 that Farrell et al. Said that exposure of a pressure ulcer, particularly to urine and feces, lead to increased colonization of the wounds and is associated with a slower rate of healing. And it was Carter et al. In 2011 who has done a meta-analysis of all the modalities present till today in a journal. Then he said that decreasing exit rate and infection rate are beneficial to the patient, to the wound and to the clinician, and overall it should improve the healing rates. So our aim of this study was to evaluate the source of contamination in these pressure ulcers and to the role of application of autologous platelet-rich plasma in controlling such infections. So we took up 25 patients with at least 2 pressure ulcers for the study, and protocol was twice a weekly local application of autologous PRP dressing was done on 1 pressure ulcer, which was designated as a case, and it was compared with daily saline dressing, which is the normal protocol in our institution, in the same patient on the another pressure ulcer that was defined as control. Pressure ulcers, urine, urethral meters and perineal swabs were taken at weekly intervals for at least 5 weeks, and they were sent for culture and sensitivity examination to know the site of infection from where pressure ulcers were infected and to see the antimicrobial properties of the platelet-rich plasma. So incidence of pressure ulcers per patients were 2.32, and these pressure ulcers were present on mean of 72.76 days, and 20 patients had 2 pressure ulcers and 5 patients even had more than 2 pressure ulcers. And grading of pressure ulcers as per European Pressure Ulcer Advisory Panel, all the pressure ulcer cases were grade 4, and in control group we could get 11 patients as grade 4 and 4 as grade 3 and 10 as grade 2. So the pressure ulcer which was larger in size was taken as a case group. So majority of the pressure ulcer cases were 64% were present on the sacrum, followed by trochanter, but majority of the controls were on the trochanter, that is 72%. So these are the pictures showing first week, this is then second week, this is a pressure ulcer case, this is the third week, and this is the 5th week. So with application of the PRP, these wounds are showing a healthy granulation tissue, and by the end of 5th week there is a good granulation tissue and there is a contraction of the pressure ulcers. But in the first week this was on the trochanter, and which progressed by the 5th week. So this is the results of the cultures from the pressure ulcers. Right at the time, 92% of the cases and 84% of the patients in the control showed contamination. By the end of the 5th week, 24% of the patients in the cases had an incidence of contamination, and it was 76%, almost saying in the same level in the controls. Cultures at enrollment of other sites like pressure ulcer cases showed growth of 92% of the patients Staph aureus, and pressure ulcer control again showed 84% Staph aureus. And urine culture were found to be positive in 100% of the patients with, and majority of the by E. coli, And cultures from the perineal area were found to be positive in 100% of the patients. In most common organism, again cultured was Staph aureus. So there was a concordance between the growth of Staph aureus in the perineal cultures and cultures from the pressure ulcer case were observed. At enrollment it was 41%, and by second week it was 47%, and concordance between the growth of Staph aureus and perineal cultures in the control was observed at the enrollment 47%, by second week 29%. But thereafter concordance between the growth of E. coli in control and urethrometers was observed, not in the cases in the pressure ulcer cases. So it was Mazzucco et al. Who showed positive microbial cultures in both study and control, difficult to heal wounds. Knox et al. In 2006 observed wound healing, acceleration and infection fighting properties of the autologous PRP, and there were again various studies which show the effect of antimicrobial properties of this. Mechanism of action of PRP is not only comprise a high concentration of platelets containing platelets growth factors, it also abundant in concentrated leukocyte and neutrophils. Neutrophils and monocytes are known for fighting against infection. Again, lymphocytes and monocytes have their own role. And now it has been suggested that platelets stores antimicrobial proteins and fungicide proteins. These are the which are having major roles that help in prevention of infection, although this has to be yet to be proved. So in conclusion, pressure ulcers are colonized by bacteria present in local environment, urine and feces, and autologous PRP is an engineered biological product. Its local application challenges the local biological milieu of the pressure ulcers through its antimicrobial properties, leading to reduction in bacterial contamination. Thank you.
Paper is open for discussion. May I invite questions from the floor? Any question?
How did you prepare this PRP?
You taken the autologous patient's own blood and centrifuged
This our blood transfusion department is producing PRP for various other things, like the in such purposes we are going in osteoarthritis, we are also doing in ACL reconstructions and all those things. Our blood transfusion department is preparing. What we are doing is we are taking 50 ml of the patient's autologous blood and we send to the blood transfusion department. They are preparing it. And they are making a standardized that otherwise each and every patient will have a different type of you can say PRP properties. They are maintaining it. They are taking that this you can say platelet should not be less than 10 lakh per deciliter, and all those they are maintaining it.
So in the liquid form you will apply, and over that you will apply the.
Sir, we activate just before you can say application. We activated with calcium chloride. 1 to 6 PRP, 1 ml is calcium chloride, and once you apply on the wound, autologous thrombin present. Usually, people say that it should be activated by thrombin. The thrombin is again costly affair. It's originally from bovine, and there are hypersensitivity reactions and those things. So it's once you apply on the wound, autologous thrombin produces its gel is produced when you apply on the pressure, and we keep a moist dressing and then cotton wash.
No debridement was done on.
So, no. It should not be kept in mind that debridement is without debridement, no surgery, no any you can say antimicrobial properties or any wound healing you can say factor is not going to affect. Debridement was done, and first debridement and wound was made clean. Then this PRP and all those line dressings were done. Okay. Debridement, you must know that there is no substitute for debridement in pressure ulcers. Thank you, sir.
I invite Dr. Anand Kishore Pal.
Respected chairpersons, learned audience and friends, today my topic of discussion is the femoral head preserving surgery for salvaging of the advanced stages of the osteonecrosis of the femoral heads, its long-term results. All of you know the advanced osteonecrosis have several problems like loss of sphericity, you can see here, the linear collapse, degenerative change in the femoral head as also in the acetabulum. But the controversy still persists in the advanced stage whether it is a femoral head preserving surgery or the arthroplasty. The rationale is once osteonecrosis starts, that progress to degenerative arthritis. So the ideal treatment should be the replacement arthroplasty, but the scenario is different because the osteonecrosis is common in young, often bilateral, and in same age-specific cases, the total hip replacement that causes high failure rate and is the high revision rate. Why THR is not acceptable? Because of the Asian patients require some squatting and sitting cross-legged, which is not allowed by the arthroplasty. There is ongoing systemic disease. Most of all, the osteonecrosis process that extends up to the lesser trochanteral level, so only the surface replacement is not the answer. So femoral head preserving operation is the desired in osteonecrosis of the femoral head in young. So 131 patients over the 105 stage fecal stage 10, 41 stage 4 necrosis selected. There are several causes. The most important this inclusion criteria is the asymmetrical restriction of femoral hip motions, preferably the flexion. If it is persists 70 to 90 degree, these are included. Whereas the collapse, if it is more than 4 millimeter, that should be excluded from our study. So initially the chilectomy and the femoral head and the subcutaneous atractectomy is done in all cases, followed by core decompression, multiple drilling, curettage of the necrotic bones and the muscle pedicle bone grafting using the tensor fascia lata anterior 2 cm or the sartorius in adolescents was performed. You can see at the anterolateral approach, the tensor fascia lata is being prepared. Tensor fascia lata is a bleeding surface, and this core decompression is done. See the chilus is being cut over here. See the muscle pedicle, the bony portion is inside the femoral head, inside the that's just below the weight bearing dome. So this is the line of chilectomy to remove the cam effect. You can see here, and this is the schematic diagram of the bone. The bone is going to be introduced over here after multiple drilling, and this is the sartorius muscle pedicle bone graft is being prepared. See, this is the steroid-induced stage 3 osteonecrosis. The 7 years follow-up the articular surface is quite normal, and it is a preoperative and postoperative CT scan. You can see here the bone graft is being incorporated within the femoral head. This is the idiopathic stage 3 osteonecrosis. This is a preoperative X-ray. The postoperative 8 years follow-up, the articular surface is going to be remodeled. Articular surface is maintained, joint space. 18 years follow-up. See there's minimal osteoarthrosis, but the articular surface is maintained. And this is the stage 4. See, you can see here the idiopathic stage 4 osteoarthrosis, gross osteoarthrosis. The preoperative CT scan showing gross degenerative changes. Whereas the 8 years follow-up, so this is the degenerative is controlled. It is little bit controlled. And this is the 16 years follow-up. See, there is the articular surface relatively maintained, as especially in the lateral view, and significantly improved clinical photograph. This is another case, alcoholic osteonecrosis stage 4. You can see here the linear collapse is going to be remodeled within time. So the results evaluated in 15 to 26 years, average 19.5 years. Radiological improvement was noted in 70% in stage 3 and 52% stage 4. But the clinical improvement, you can say 80% in stage 3 and 60% in stage 4. So the radiology doesn't correlate all with the clinical pathology, clinical parameters. The Kaplan-Meier survey analysis of stage 3, you can see 82% survived in stage 3, whereas 74% survived in stage 4. So it's based on the criteria of hospital special surgery. Clinical improvement was obtained in excellent result, 80% cases in stage 3 and 63% stage 4. Survivorship in 82% stage 3 and 74% stage 4. And the patients with the HS score below 20, so that is considered not survival and recommended for total hip replacements. So friends, so there are several hurdles to be considered, like clinical parameters, etiology, duration, lesion size, position of the necrotic area, amount of collapse, and the most important, the degeneration of the articular cartilage. So the degeneration of article is the most important. The most important point is macroscopically, paraoperatively, which is seen normal, that remains the mechanically functional even with large osteonecrosis. And moreover, the larger lesion does not mean the more degeneration. Actually, the necrotic area which needs to be removed is much smaller than the radiograph suggests. And the rectification of the collapse can be possible if it is a limited collapse one by chilectomy, paraoperative elevation of the collapse segments and its maintenance by the vascularized graft, and also the repair of the necrotic area by muscle pedicle bone grafting. You can see how much linear collapse is gradually becoming remodeled, and most of the location, precise curettage of the necrotic area and placement of vascularized graft at the center of the necrotic zone can prevent progression. It is proved by several workers What is the symptomatic relief? Anterior capsulotomy, removal of the marginal adhesions, chelectomy relieves the capsular stretching pain. The above factors, in addition to subcutaneous adductor tenotomy, improve the hip motions. Multiple drilling and judicious curettage of the manicrotic bone decompresses the femoral head, resulting in immediate pain relief, whereas the muscle period bone graft causes the long-lasting pain relief by repairing the necrotic area in the future. See how the stage 4s, how it is going to be remodeled within years. And again, the vascularized fibular graft is based on the single artery that gradually easily becomes compressed, and easily the vascular supply becomes blocked by the torsion, twist, and thrombosis. Whereas there is numerous muscular channels, vascular channels in muscle pericardial bone graft cannot be blocked. See, it is reflected by clinical parameters. The 82% survivorship in comparison to 67% vascularized fibula, 61% in vascularized celiac crest graft. So this protocol provided the healed femoral head, no increased risk of foreign body, may have the possibility of survival all over throughout the long the life, and wherever THR is performed, it will be simpler than the revision arthroplasty. So it provides symptomatic relief in both the stage 3 cases and stage 4 cases. It can delay that need of THR. So it appears to be an effective option for the post-collapse pre-degenerative osteonecrosis, even in the presence of extreme radiological change. If good 70 to 90 degree range of motion is preserved, that can be easily preserved. You can salvage the femoral head in stage 3 and postpone the THR in stage 4 cases. Thank you.
Paper is open for discussion. Any questions?
So
Yes.
which approach do you use for opening the?
Yes, it's the anterolateral approach, Smith-Patterson approach.
Okay, a question for you.
Yes, sir.
It's recommended that only for stage 1 and 2 core decompression helps, not for 3 and 4, but your
Yes, that
are
is
really
why-
encouraging. And
Yes,
your
that
all
is why
bone
this is a-
graphs. Yeah.
This is why I am going to present this case. It is actually a controversial issue. That is why I have started with the controversy, and now you can tell whether the controversy exists or not. Because osteonecrosis in young, that is a very, very burning question, burning problem in our country, and THR is not a solving problem. Because THR is actually it requires the uncemented THR, and there are several problems. It cannot allow the squatting, sitting cross-legged, and then there is a long-term study showed that it causes significant osteolysis in comparison with the cemented arthroplasty, as there is no fibrous layer in between the cup and the femoral head. And also the osteonecrosis that extends of the lesser trochanter level. So mere removal, mere replacement of the femoral head is not the solution. But in this case, the stage 3, there is 80% survivorship analysis in a 15 years follow-up that can effectively delay the need of THR, at least that is the point. And in stage 4 also, there is 70% survivorship. So it can effectively salvage the femoral head in young patients, so that after the active life is over, the THR can easily be done. And moreover, this second operation is much more easier than the revision arthroplasty if it is done earlier. That is the point.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next speaker is David Vimal Kumar.
You can point it. Respected chairpersons and my dear colleagues, good morning to one and all. I am here to talk about the geometry of implant consideration for the management of femoral fractures in polio limbs. We know that achieving a stable biological fixation in osteoporotic, deformed, hypovascularized polio affected femur is not a straightforward mission. What are the factors which are the challenging factors in these patients? There are two factors. One is patient factors and implant factors. If you see the polio patient, the bone are hypoplastic, deformed and osteoporotic, and muscles are atrophied and hypovascularized. And soft tissues, patient will be often having the joint contractures, which may be difficult in case of positioning the patient intraoperatively. So, coming to the implant factor, we are having the regular implant for designed for a normal anatomy may not be fit in altered and deformed polio affected femurs. For example, in all these patients, we have to do meticulous preoperative evaluation. If you are going for a femur fracture, what I am going to present is all our femur fracture. So I am going to talk about the femur evaluation. So in all these patients, we have to do femoral length measurement, medullary canal diameter, neck diameter, neck shaft angle, both anteroposterior and medial lateral diameters at the level of condyles, and we have to look for the bowing of the femoral bone. coming to the case scenarios, this is the 35 years old female patient affected from polio, had a 1 month, had a fracture shaft of femur. She came to us after 1 month. You can able to see the comminution at the level of mid shaft. We measured preoperatively. We found that almost normal measurements. So we planned, but there was no abnormal varied bone curvature. We planned for a standard femoral nail. So we have done, since the patient came to us after 1 month, we are not able to achieve closed reduction. So we went for open reduction with nailing, and we have done bone grafting also. In this patient, we have inserted 36x9 intramedullary nailing. At the end of 12 months, patient had a serous discharge from the distal screw side. Yeah. From the distal screw side. So we have removed the distal screw side. This is the 18-month follow-up, and this is a 24-month follow-up showing the good union. This is a post-op video. It's not working, I think. Okay, it's not working. Coming to the second case, this is a 35 years old female patient who had a subtrochanteric fracture of right hip. According to St. Schmitt's, a type 2B. We have done all the preoperative measurement, including neck shaft angle and medullary canal diameter. It shows to be neck shaft angle of 137 degree, neck diameter of 22, but the medullary canal diameter 7 mm and femur length was about 32 centimeter. So the treatment options, recon nail and PFN nail, were not a good option in this case. So we decided to go with DHS, and we have done open reduction internal fixation with 135 degree dynamic gips screw. And coming to the third case is a 36 years old male patient who had a shaft of femur middle third, type 4 Vinkus-Janssen, radiological measurement shown to be a medullary canal diameter of 7 mm and femur length of 32 mm. And so the standard femur nail was not a good option in this case. So we have planned for plating, but if you see this patient X-ray, is a very osteoporotic. So we have, if you are going to use a dynamic compression plate, there is a high chance of implant failure. So we have used a locking compression plate in this case. This is showing the 8-month follow-up. The fourth case is the 36-year-old male patient who had a fracture supracondylar femur, and radiological measurements were appears to be normal. So we have went with that it was not of much altered anatomy at the condylar level, and the pre-op radiological measurement were matched with the distal femur locking compression plate and found to be satisfactory, and we went with distal locking compression plate of femur and fixed with 12-volt distal femur locking compression plate with lag screws. This is an interesting case. This is a 35 years old male patient who had a bilateral polio limbs with supracondylar femur fracture in his right limb, which was type 1, and with fixed flexion deformity. The radiological measurement shows that the distal femoral condylar are hypoplastic and osteoporotic, and canal diameter was 7 mm and femur length was 32 centimeter. So the pre-op radiological measurement with distal femur locking compression plate was not satisfactory. So we have arranged all the other implants for other bones. For example, we have arranged both the proximal tibial locking plate, proximal humerus locking plate, and intraoperatively we matched the bone with the locking plates. We found that the proximal tibial locking plate was satisfactory with this bone. And intraoperatively we had a complication, positioning. Since the patient had a fixed flexion contracture, we had difficulty in positioning. Somehow we have managed, and we have matched the distal proximal tibial locking plate. You can see the X-ray, it was matched almost with the bone. This is a 2-month follow-up patient. This is the next case is a 36-year-old male patient with a supracondylar femur, and pre-radiological measurements showing that hypoplastic femoral condyle, and in this patient proximal tibial locking plate was not matched, but the proximal humerus locking plate was matched. So we went with proximal humerus locking plate, and this was a post-op X-ray. And this X-ray is to show what will happen if you are not preoperatively done all evaluation. This patient suffered from polio. Somewhere else they have done a nailing, which was 9x36. He came to us with severe gluteal pain and demanding a nail exit. And we have we have measured preoperatively. We found that the nail diameter was, canal diameter was 9 mm and femoral length was 30. So we have arranged the custom-made femoral nail of 30 into 9 to revise the case. But fortunately, the fracture site was united, so we have done only implant exit alone. This is the post-op X-ray. So in our case, we have done totally 15 cases, of which 8 were male and 7 were female, age group between 20 to 45 years, of which trochanteric fractures were 4 cases, which was managed with 3 with DHS, 1 with conservative treatment, and shaft fractures 4 cases was managed with standard femoral nail, and 1 with custom made nail, and 1 with elastic nail, and 1 with locking compression plate, and distal femur fractures 7 cases managed with distal femur locking plate of 4, and proximal humerus locking plate 2, and proximal tibial locking plate 1. Discussion: the radiological measurement should be made, and after appropriate radiological allowance, feasibility of particular implant should be assessed. So digital X-ray will not be helpful in these cases. And the choices of implants then have to be custom made, or implants designed for use in other bones like tibia, humerus have to be used with the knowledge of how and why it is used for achieving a stable fixation. Aware of difficulties with the different implants. For example, if you going with intramedullary nail in cases of polio infections, you may have a difficulty in access to the entry point, and also the bone geometry may be altered, which may cause an intraoperative fracture. And if you going with the DHS, you should know that the width of the neck and alter neck shaft angle. With dynamic compression plate, osteoporotic bone, the chances of implant failure are more. With X-Fix, is a cumbersome for small femur, and complication of spin tract infections are more. It has been given in Palais D 1990 in which is the complications of Elizabeth techniques. In advantages with LCP, which gives an creating additional cortex and plate and locking the screw in the plate, thus disturbing the deformed loads into all the screws equally, and also it gives a triangulation effect. So locking compression plate is much more advantage in case of polio affected limbs. The role of conservative, long recurrency in bed, malunion, non-union, joint contracture, these are the more hazardous in case of polio patients. And why there is no proper implant? The polio patients have decreased deforming muscle power, a factor that might have prevented testing the mechanical properties of the implant fully. So there is no proper implant for polio fractures so far. Thus, to conclude, no implant is unique for surgical management of femur fractures in post-polio survivors. So proper pre-op evaluation, measuring the bone geometry, making out the best implant, and going in the theatre with wide array of implants for managing complication may help in bringing out the good results in polio patients. And take home message: meticulous pre-op planning and arrange array of implants preoperatively, consider bone grafting, achieve early rehabilitation is a goal. So the prevention is better than cure. We have to give pulse polio in all patients of children.
Paper is open for discussion. Okay, how did you match the humerus? That's a very weak implant. If
so the bone is already osteoporotic and deformed. It looks just almost.
So what is your post-op protocol in such cases?
Sir, in that patient, particularly in that patient who had a bilateral, he was suffered from bilateral polio affected limbs with fixed flexion contracture. We want to achieve only bony union, sir. Okay. Patient was on POP only.
Yeah. So you give POP to this patient?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The next speaker is Jiten Sarangi.
Presentation. Your presentation, sir.
Jitendra Sarangi. Good morning everyone. Myself Dr. Jitendra Sarangi from Cuttack. I am going to present a topic regarding biomechanical comparison of current intramedullary nails with the geometry of the femur, a cadaveric study. Now, femur interlocking. Here starts the journey of every budding orthopedician. A satisfactory nailing depends upon various factors like bone characteristics, fracture site and type, rimming and nail diameter, entry point, and finally implant design and characteristics. So the basic two things are bone characteristics and implant characteristics. Now coming to introduction, currently the standard treatment for most of the femoral shaft fractures in adults is intramedullary interlocking nailing, as it offers biomechanical and biological advantage when compared with other methods of fixation like plating or K-nail. The purpose of this study is to evaluate the anterior curvature of the femur that affects the intramedullary nail insertion
revision prosthesis design, and the biomechanics of the proximal femur. Now coming to materials and method, 58 femurs of different sizes belonging to different age group and sex were collected from the skeletal collection of the Museum Department of Anatomy. Anterior curvature measured by processing the digital images of the femurs with 3-point formula. Curvature of 8 current antegrade intermediate nails were obtained from their manufacturers and confirmed by the measurements from their templates. Now the 3-point formula. The 3 points are the midpoint of the line just above the flare of the femoral condyle. Flare of the femoral condyle, and midpoint of the line just below the lesser trochanter. Midpoint of the line at the mid distance between the first two lines. Now the formula. If it is as we know, femur is a curved line, so the points are 1, 2, 3, and if we draw the radius of curvature like the assume a center at this point, then the radius of curvature will be A. So it will be A, B, C will constitute the isolation a right angle triangle, so that the A square will be equal to B square plus C square. Finally we get the radius of curvature, that is A equals to C square plus X square by 2x. Now these are the photos of some cadaver femur what I got from the Department of Anatomy, and these are the implants. Now I have grossly compared the curvature of the femur with the interlocking nails. Now I take these bones to the radiology department and measure the 3 points. Now in this particular specimen, the C, that is the perpendicular drawn from the curved line to the straighter line, that is 17.71. Sorry, X is equal to 1.55 and C is equal to 17.71. So finally radius of curvature of the femur found to be 101.94. Now similarly I took the digital images of various femurs and tabulated all those. Now coming to result. Mean radius of curvature was found to be 127.8 cm, ranging from 96 cm to 180 cm. 95% lie within 100 to 160 cm. There was no effect of age on femoral curvature, nor was there a correlation between femoral width or femoral length to curvature. Radius of curvature of the current intermediate nails ranged from 186 cm to 300 cm, that is straighter than the normal femurs. Most of the Indian nail manufacturers could not answer satisfactory our query regarding radius of curvature of their nail. Now conclusion, there was a large mismatch between the curvature of sub-current antegrade intermediate nails and the average femur. Although this is only one factor affecting nail insertion, the mismatch warrants a reprisal of these intermediate nail designs, particularly for those larger diameter nails that have a greater rigidity due to design or material. Now take home message. If the fracture is proximal third fracture, larger diameter nail, obvious manner, the danger is much more. Our inspiration is the topic from the JOT, that is penetration of the distal femoral anterior cortex during intermediate nailing of subtrochanteric fractures, a report of 3 cases, and undetected iatrogenic lesions of anterior femoral shaft during the intermediate nailing, a cadaver study. Thank you.
Paper is open for discussion. Dr.
Had you measured the diameter or that radii in that nails or not? Those nails you had. You could have measured that same radii with the same formula with the femur.
Yes, sir.
You measured that?
No, sir. I got from the template.
Only cadaver femurs only.
Yes, sir. I got measured only cadaver femurs, sir.
Not the nails.
No, sir. I got that from the templates, sir.
You got the nails.
Yes, sir.
You had the nails of the old company, old
Yes,
manufacturers.
Yes, sir.
You could have measured radii of that, and then you compared whether they are at the right radii or not.
Yes. Though they have sir, their templates of various sizes and their diameters, radius of curvature.
Even from template you can measure it. That is what Dr. Naveen is pointing at.
Yes, sir.
You have measured the cadaveric femur radii.
Yes, sir.
At the same time, if you had measured, there must be some conclusion. What should be done? What next?
Yes, sir. There in the template it has been already written their curvature. What is the radius of curvature? It has
You
all.
said that they have not provided any data about radii.
They
You could not answer what the radii that they have. Of their
sir, 186 to 300, sir. I have written that also.
No, manufacturers.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. We invite next speaker, Dr. Anuj Jain.
Good morning everyone, I am Dr. Anuj. I will be presenting my talk on augmentation of bone healing in delayed and atrophic non-unions of fractures by decal bone. As we all know, the autografts are long considered as a gold standard of bone grafting, but there are limitations with autografts like limited quantity that is available, do not cite problems like pain, herniations, osteomyelitis, increased blood loss and increased surgical time. As we can see in the table, the autografts are considered gold standard because of their good osteoinductive, osteoconductive and osteogenic property. The fresh allogenic graft are not used now because of their increased immunogenicity. But we compare freeze-dried allogenic graft and partially decalcified allograft, we can see the osteoinductive property of partial decalcified allogenic graft is much more as compared to freeze-dried allograft. The decal bone have been used in the past to fill various defects due to benign cystic lesion of bones, bridging large osteoparietal grafts and spinal fusion. With these things in mind, we frame our study as a prospective study in the Department of Orthopedics, University College of Medical Sciences and Guru Tegh Bahadur Hospital. 20 patients with clinical radiological diagnosis of delayed and atrophic non-unions of long bones fracture were included in the study. Patients at extremes of ages like less than 18 years or more than 60 years, pathological fractures, metabolic bone disease, infected non-unions, hypertrophic non-unions, and patients with systemic diseases like diabetes mellitus were excluded from the study. The bone was harvested, prepared in the bone bank in the Department of Orthopedics. The patient undergoing arthroplasty and amputation, the bone was taken from that patient after informed consent. All the soft tissue and the porosity was removed from the bone. The bone was washed with normal saline and immersed in freshly prepared solution of 0.6 normal HCl and a sterile container. Thereafter, the 0.6 normal HCl was changed every 24 hours. As we can see in the slide that after decalcification, the decal bone starts floating in the container. After this point, the decal bone was again washed with normal saline. The part of the bone was sent for culture, and this bone was preserved in 70 to 90% ethanol in domestic refrigerator at 4 degrees Celsius. This is the storage picture. In the operative room, this bone was taken out of the ethanol jar. The scraping of the bone was done, which was sent for culture, and the slivers of this bone was made, which were put across the fracture site in a bridging fashion. There were 20 patients with a mean age of 34 years, with the range from 18 to 55 years. There were 8 humeral non-unions, 7 tibial non-unions, and 5 femur non-unions. There were 8 delayed unions and 12 atrophic non-unions. 15 patients required internal fixation and allografting, while 5 patients required just allografting. In result, we saw that 8 patients had serious discharge from the wound that subsided at 3 weeks without any intervention. 1 patient had infection which required debridement at 3 weeks, but the wound healed and the fracture healed in 16 weeks. 19 patients arrived in a mean time of 15 weeks. We know that demyelination leads to reduction in inorganic constituents and softening of bone, which makes the bone more porous, that is more osteoconductive, as well as it enhances the availability of inductive factors, that is more osteoinductive. The demyelination causes loss of 90% of the protein. Only those proteins that are linked to the highly cross-linked Plougin matrix are retained, that is bone morphogenic proteins. There are some concerns regarding use of decal bone, the disease transmission. The demyelination process exposes the donor bone to at least 2 virucidal and bactericidal baths, that is ethanol and HCl, that makes the chances of transmission highly remote. The other concern is of immunogenicity. It has not been seen in clinical practice. A study comparing the cellularity of and CD4 and CD4 counts in perigraft area was comparing the allograft and autografts. The study showed there was no difference in the counts in both the autografts as well as allografts. I would like to conclude the present study has shown the evidence of efficacy of decal bone in augmentation of bone healing, but additional focused independent trials are required to assess the efficacy of decal bone. These are some of the clinical pictures showing the efficacy of this bone. Thank you.
Thank you. The paper is open for discussion. Are there any questions?
Have you got any additional support from other departments?
No. We have bone bank maintained in our own department. We send the routine cultures to the micro department, but that is our job.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I invite the next speaker, Dr. Naresh Babu. Dr. Naresh Babu is present.
It's not here.
If he is not here, then we conclude the session, and thank all the speakers to adhere to their time, and they had wonderful presentation. Thank you, and I am thankful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share the session. Thank you.
Thank you.